Well, this could be such a long podcast. Hopefully I'll keep it within 20 minutes. So, it's a strange title, isn't it? The Rational Approach to Life and Death. Because we have this illusion that we are rational creatures, that we can live by reason. But in actual fact, we are 99% driven by emotion. Any pretense that living a rational life is usually just illusion or delusional. However, we can improve the quality of our lives by aspiring to that, and hopefully by the end of this you'll see how. So I'm going to quote Spinoza, and as you know, if you've listened to anything else of mine, then you know I quote Spinoza quite a lot. As far as Spinoza is concerned, reason is a big deal, because reason is the only thing that really separates us from the animals. The animals have no reflective consciousness, or seem to have no reflective consciousness. And that reflective consciousness allows us to think about things and to reason. Now, on its own, reason has no power, and it has no power because 99% of us is just pure animal and is driven by desires and pleasure and pain and all those things. So, have you ever noticed that you put some nice schedule for your activities for the coming week, and by the third hour in the week, you've almost totally abandoned it? And why is that? Because, well, reason can sit there and say to itself, tomorrow I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do something else. And by the time you get to something else, then some emotion has arisen, and you're totally off track. And that's the way it is, and that's why scheduling and all that kind of planning is largely a waste of time, because you don't know what emotional drive you're going to have in 10 hours or 20 hours or even the next hour from now. So Spinoza was a rationalist. He's called one of the rationalist philosophers. Yet he says that reason cannot take us where we need to go. He actually says that in the document called the Short Treatise. He also says that necessarily we will always be plagued by emotions, by passions. And passion is a better word because it implies some kind of driving force. So we'll always be plagued by boredom, by fear, by hope, by love, by hate, by envy, any one of the 100 or so emotions that we can experience and combinations thereof. And that will always take place because we are largely 99% animal. And animals are driven by those things. If I smile at my dogs, they wag their tails. If I frown at them, they skulk in a corner. And that's the way it is with them. And that's the way it is with human beings. If someone smiles at you, you feel well disposed towards them. And if they frown at you, you don't like them. Same thing. So, let me say how, or explain how reason can at least help you in your life. And in fact, it's not really reason so much, it's more understanding that comes from reason. So, just in case you think this is some kind of self-help, do A, B, C and D and you're going to be happy. Well, it isn't. Because there are a number of premises behind this particular podcast. And the first one is that there is no one out there who can tell you how to live your life. Because they're not you. They can't tell you to, not drink alcohol. Maybe alcohol has some very, very strong emotional connotations for you. And so giving up alcohol would be a fairly heavy-duty experience. And some people can and some people can't. It really depends on their history and the way they've lived their lives. So no one out there is going to tell you or can tell you how to live your life. People want somebody to tell them how to live their life because they don't know themselves. But it's your responsibility. The second thing is no one can basically give your life purpose or meaning. There's no external authority. There's no God or guru or philosopher or whoever who can give you meaning and purpose. You have to do that yourself. And I'll come on to the crux of all this in a moment. The universe itself knows nothing of purpose. Purpose is a purely human construct, as is meaning. And the universe has no notions of justice or injustice. It just manifests as it manifests and gets on with it. It has none of these human concepts that we seem to want to impose on life. Life just does its own thing, and we are then left open-mouthed when we see something horrific happen and cannot understand how it could happen. How many times have you heard someone say, if there's a God, how could this happen? Well, there isn't a God in that sense. There's nobody looking down and saying, I'm going to stop this because it's so terrible. There's no entity doing that. Now, this reflective consciousness that we have, which we can call reason, has been very successful in dealing with the outside world. So, physics particularly is probably the pinnacle of that achievement. And the physics tells us, for example, that the sun is 93 million miles away and not just, a couple of miles away in the sky or something like that. It tells us that railway lines, when we look at them, stand in the middle and look at them into the distance, do not converge. That's just an optical illusion, and physics describes that very well, and so on and so forth. Physics has been very successful. And mathematics and things like economics. They've all been very successful, but when it comes to our internal world, then we haven't been so successful with the use of reason. If you look at the state of the world, I think you would probably agree that reason has not allowed us to control our internal, emotional, passion-driven lives in the way that things like physics have allowed us to conquer the external world. And so it's a pressing thing that we need to address pain and how to avoid pain, and our desires, our driving desires. Sometimes they're not very healthy for us, and so we need to find out a way that we can deal with our internal world. Now, there's you've probably seen other videos on the nature of death and these kind of topics, and there's a decision that you have made. And that decision is that you are not going to commit suicide, or so it would seem. If you're not going to commit suicide, if you're not going to opt out of life, then you need to live life with as little pain as possible. That sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Unless you're some kind of masochist or sadistic character wanting to inflict pain on others, you generally tend to shy away from pain. So, a character called Epicurus, a Greek philosopher, said that pleasure is just the absence of pain. And oddly enough, Schopenhauer actually believed that pain was the real driver in our lives, not pleasure, pain. We always move away from pain as far as we can. And because we're greedy, we not only want to move away from pain, but we want to move towards pleasure. Now, if you look at all the great minds that have existed over the centuries, they will say the same thing. Pleasures are pure fantasy. Voltaire said, pleasure is just an illusion. Goethe said, pleasure is just an illusion. Schopenhauer said, pleasure is just an illusion. Epicurus said, pleasure is just an illusion. Why is it an illusion? Well, because when you imagine a pleasure, you don't actually know. There's nothing real going on, it's just your imagination. If I get this new car, if I go on this holiday to the Seychelles Islands, if I get this new partner, this is going to be pleasurable for me. You don't know that. It could be hell on earth. Your new car could have a faulty steering device on it and you plunge over a cliff. Well, that could happen. Your new partner could end up being just a total nightmare. Your new holiday could be in a cockroach-infected hotel or infested hotel somewhere. So when you go chasing after pleasures, you don't actually know what you're going to get. So deal with the real. rather than the imaginary. The real is pain. So if you have, let's say you've dropped a brick on your toe, then you know that you have a painful toe. And if the pain is sufficient, you may go to the hospital to see if it's broken or something like that. And you will take steps to relieve the pain and to heal the toe. It's real. And so what happens is that as you address your pains, then you will experience more pleasure. Pleasure isn't something you have to go chasing after. Pleasure happens anyway. And in fact, it's not really pleasure that we're after. I think really what we're after is joy. Because pleasure, in truth, is always tainted with something a little bit sour, because we never really get what we're looking for when we go chasing pleasures. And Schopenhauer says this about joy. Joy normally slips in uninvited and unannounced by itself, quietly and without ceremony, often at the most unimportant, most trivial occasions, under the most mundane circumstances, indeed anywhere but at glamorous or glorious events. Beautiful saying. So joy comes in uninvited, and joy is really the real pleasure that you're after. It comes in uninvited because you're not seeking it. It's a bitch, isn't it? But actually, real pleasure is like that. It only comes when you're not looking for it. So, having said that we need to avoid pain as far as possible, that means trying to live a life where we maintain the health of our bodies. So, no overeating, no drugs, no drinking, no smoking, exercising, the life of the perfect saint. Are you going to be able to do this? Well, probably to some extent. But I've known people who are fitness fanatics, and they all have some little thing that they can't avoid. Or they go insane, which is actually what happened with someone I knew who was total fitness fanatic and totally deprived himself of all what we would call ordinary pleasures, and became insane. But I actually think he was a bit unhinged anyway, to drive himself like he was doing. But anyway, that's another story. But in a reasonable way, we try to live a life so that we don't encourage our bodies to become unhealthy. And can we do that always? Well, no. Why can't we do that? Because we're fucked up. That's why. If you look at the video called The Denial of Death by Ernst Becker, you'll understand why we're fucked up. Because from the moment you're born, you're thrown into a world that is full of horrors. And by the age of 4 or 5, you are avoiding those horrors as best you can in fairy tales and imagination and imaginary little people that you know, and various stories and comic books, whatever is required to take you away from the harsh realities of life. And so we grow up fucked up. And so it's going to be a fairly unusual person that can live a totally pure life in terms of their eating and drinking and smoking and exercising all the time and so on and so forth. But this is where understanding comes into it. If you understand that, then when you get liver disease because you drink too much alcohol, then at least you'll understand what's going on and why it's occurred. And there would at that point be no point blaming yourself, because you didn't drink yourself silly because you had a choice. You did it because actually you had no choice. As Spinoza says, and many philosophers have said, we have no free will. But there are ways to deal with these passions, and if you look at my other podcasts, then you can get some idea of what's going on there. I'm not going to cover it again. But there are ways for us to get into our pains and address them. Because, of course, I've been talking about physical pain, but emotional pain It's our natural tendency to run away from emotional pain. We don't do that with physical pain. We seek a cure of some kind, or some kind of alleviation of the suffering. With emotional pain, we tend to just run away from it and go chasing towards pleasures, which is absolutely the wrong thing to do. We need to sit with and focus on our emotional pains, which is very difficult. It requires a huge amount of honesty. And not many people are prepared or equipped to do that. But anyway, that's what we need to do. And then we can start to diminish our emotional pains as well. And there's one magic component in all of this, and that component is understanding. Understanding is just such an underrated notion, but if you understand the nature of your emotions and the nature of other people's emotions, because actually they are the same as yours, if you understand those things, they have less power over you. And through understanding, you can come to navigate life more skillfully, as the Buddhists would say. And that is the best you can do. So let me go over this step by step. You've decided not to commit suicide, number one. Therefore, you desire a life that is as pain-free as possible. Not totally pain-free, nobody gets that, but as pain-free as possible. And that means actually addressing your emotional pains and your physical pains. And you do that through understanding them and through paying attention to them rather than avoiding them. Because actually the thing with all these pains, particularly emotional pains, is that they do actually diminish the more you understand them and the more you are prepared to experience them. Because it's the running away that creates the neurosis and creates more pains. So you've decided not to kill yourself. You want to live as pleasant a life as possible, and you know that one day you're going to die, but you've decided not to make that today. So between now and then, you want to live as pain-free as possible. And the way to do that is through understanding. And of course, somebody would probably write a book about this and say, here are the steps, da 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 da, and how easy it is. But actually, it isn't easy. You need to do all your own work. I've had to do all my own work, 40 years worth of it. And to arrive at this kind of understanding is something you either undertake or you suffer, and you, to use Gurdjieff's term, you die like a dog. How does a dog die? A dog dies as a dumb beast. No understanding of anything. Just its life has come to an end and it dies in a miserable state. So, it's quite easy, isn't it? Quite easy and very difficult, actually. The easy part is the understanding of it. In the outline, you want a relatively pain-free life. Do not go chasing for pleasures because they will bring you misery. Just focus on the pains in your life. The exact opposite of what we're told in our consumer society. But it's the pains that ruin your life. It's not the pleasures. The pleasures are just illusions anyway. They're just mirages. Just get rid of the pains and you'll have a pleasant life. End of story. And you may even experience a joyful life. But you need understanding to do that. And in my case, and your case will be different. I've said no one can tell you how to live your life. But in my case, I got most of my information from the people that I've known, several teachers. Spinoza, Gurdjieff, Schopenhauer, and Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, a few books on Zen Buddhism, and eventually you start to form a picture, but you have to do it yourself. 20 minutes on YouTube isn't going to hack it, but hopefully it might give you some ideas.